Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you, Claudia, for having me. I'm really excited, not only by hearing all the previous presentations, which were outstanding. Also, we don't realize it, but being all of us together today, to me, it's the first meeting I don't have in Zoom in over 18 months. And believe me, it truly makes a difference to be together, to talk to each other, to be able to reconnect in a way that seemed to be actually far away from us. Thank you so much. Claudia is really tall and I'm small, so you have to adjust for size. I wanted to give you a sense today of a topic that has always concerned me, and I think it's important for Hispanics in this country, as it's important probably for the Latin American population, which is financial inclusion. But as I heard some of you talk, it came to my mind that particularly the issue of the GDP that it's attained through the Hispanic population, which is huge, I mean, the $2.7 trillion. And I was looking very rapidly at what was the equivalent of that. And it's the equivalent of Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina together producing that same output. But the big difference is that Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina, we are close to 300 million people in lieu of the 62 million people. So just look at the level of productivity. So the GDP per capita in my country and the countries in Latin America, it's around $9,000, $10,000, and here it's over $40,000. Well, going back to the topic of Latin America just a little bit, I was telling Claudia that something where we could pull together, it's that frequently Latin American countries don't truly have the capacity to leverage themselves in the US. But it's awkward that having 62 million Hispanics in this country, first generation, second generation, 10th generation, doesn't matter, that we haven't been able to leverage fully, and on the contrary, through the support of these countries, help you attain your goals, and then you help us attain our mutual goals. And I think when you look at the NAFTA today, the Mexico, US, Canada, and all these trade agreements, sometimes they're missing this other support, which is trying to leverage ourselves in this country through the Hispanic population to get through in many of the objectives that we have. We were discussing the issue here before with Sister Norma of the border. It's hurting. I've been there, and believe me, it's hurting in many respects. Seeing people from Central America moving to that border, living there in inhumane conditions, trying to see if they can make it to this side of the border, and truly being this a political problem in lieu of being a human theme, it's something that should bother all of us. And hopefully, well, through the kind of help that she gives, but the help that we should give, we could make a difference for all these people. Now let me get back to the topic that I wanted to share with you today, which is financial inclusion. And as I was trying to convey to you a message, I was trying to compare what's financial inclusion in this country compared, for instance, with Mexico. And let me just share with you some figures which came to me as interesting. In Mexico, only 40% of the adults have a banking account. 1 in 10 Mexicans have a banking account in the rural areas. There is a huge gender gap. More or less 33 million out of 66 million Mexican women do not have today a banking account. 90% of the credit we allocate as banks, it's urban, only 10%. No, only 1% it's rural, and 20% of the population live in the rural areas. SMEs, which account for more or less 90% of the workforce, only receive 40% of the total loans in my country. And there's huge contrasts between the north and south. But when you look at the US, obviously the level of development, it's totally different. Notwithstanding, today more or less 6% of American households lack access to banking. And Out of that 6%, when you look at the Latino population and the Afro-American population, that proportion goes to over 40%. So it's not the 6% we should be looking at. It hides a lot. It's actually in the left behind populations, the Latins and the Afro-Americans, where we see that 40% still lack accounts, and 20% which do have an account require to leverage themselves through non-financial intermediaries, sometimes sharks, let's call them what they are, in non-traditional financial services, to make ends meet their requirements every month. So they live leveraged. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine that works in a payday company was telling me that around 40% of the population in the US, 40%, do not have savings of $500 to take them out of the woods if they have an emergency. That's a huge proportion of people that actually have to leverage themselves to go through. But there were other things that impressed me. I had the privilege of studying in LA when I was an undergrad. And as I heard some of you, something came to my mind, which I hadn't thought of it for many years. I had a colleague, which I don't remember his name, but we used to call him the Count, because he looked like Count Dracula. But the story of the Count was interesting because he was, like me, very Mexican, but he didn't want to speak Spanish. And I will go to him and say, hey, speak in Spanish and let's have... And when he dared to answer to me, he spoke back with a very American accent, his Spanish. And I said, you're joking. I should have the accent, not you. And then one day, as we became friends, colleagues in college, I told him, really, why don't you speak a normal Spanish? And he told me, Alex, the reason I don't speak Spanish is because my parents forbade me to speak Spanish so that I could integrate into the US as an American. And it's something that it was a cold shower to me, saying, oh my God, the only way he and his family think they can integrate, it's by him not speaking Spanish, but more importantly, speaking English as a Native American. And I felt really awkward, and I didn't understand it, how many of them in LA, many places in the US probably it's the same, felt that the way to integrate was to leave behind some of their culture. And today we know clearly that culture is perhaps one of the most important elements that will prevail to make sure that the Hispanic community propels itself forward. But looking back again to financial inclusion, I came across some figures that truly appalled me. 6 out of every 10 students that take a loan in the US colleges are Hispanics. But that's not the problem. Great, they take loans. 10 years after they take the loan, they still owe 80% of what they took. They're not able to amortize their debts. We should worry about that. In terms of leveraging, people putting money for a housing, mortgage. Normally, any banker like myself will advise any friend never to leverage over 30% of their income to undertake whichever endeavor you want to do. Today, the burden of the Latino population in housing, it's almost 60%. So that also hurts. So that's where we should be focusing to try to see how they can be helped. We can be helped in essence because in essence it's part of the same game to overcome those things. There are some encouraging news. I think things are moving. We're discussing them before we were afraid of discussing these things. And perhaps the most important aspect, and I've been discussing with some of you this theme, it's financial education. Financial education truly makes the difference between being abused in life and being able to manage your own destiny. We should strive, and I applaud to this initiative that Claudia mentioned, that every single high school, every single college has in its charter, in its courses, the obligation to teach people to manage their money. It's fundamental. No matter what we do in life, no matter, we will have to deal with money. And we better learn to manage it well. We will avoid many abuses and many unfortunate things if we do that way. So financial education should be at the center of everything we do. Another thing that we should do, it's also make sure that politicians understand the kind of regulation that they put in certain parts of the financial system. Frequently, people don't understand the way this works. And by putting certain legislation, they think that they're going to be protecting the underserved. And contrary to that, sometimes it damages more than that. They don't truly understand, and we should help them understand. Now, particularly with all this technological transformation we're going through in the world, I'm very much concerned that these changes, this transformation are going so fast that if we don't work together with the politicians, the regulators, they will not understand the changes. And this could lead to abuses, and this could lead also to having a regulation that is behind the curve in lieu of being at the curve or in front to manage this transformation. Clearly, we're seeing also something positive in financial inclusion, much more competition and much more transparency. A lot of the problems that we have led in the past, it's opacity. Clearly, when you see any sort of opacity in anything that we do in life, something bad is behind it. When someone wants to hide something from you, something is wrong. That's where corruption lies. If we could put everything in a crystal box, difficulty for propelling corruption will be there. But technology, it's allowing us also something which, for instance, an institution that I work for, reducing dramatically costs. Frequently, one of the critiques that I get as a banker working for Banco Azteca, which is a bank that leads with popular banking, we have more or less 20 million clients at the bank. We have more or less 52, 53 colleagues working in this institution. Everything today is digital. But they tell me, you guys charge too much for a lot of these credits. And I will answer, it's true. Some of my competitors tell me, well, you're doing that, and I tell them, listen, be my guest. There is no barrier for you guys to come in. On the contrary, it's financial inclusion. It's giving them capacity to leverage themselves, fulfill their dreams, and get somewhere in life. What has happened is that people don't understand that if I provide $1 million loan to one of you, well, I will be assessing the risk. I will be analyzing whether it's feasible to provide you that $1 million. And then monitoring you, it's going to be complex, but quite simple, because it's only one of you. But if I utilize that same $1 million and I provide 10,000 loans, then the costs of monitoring, following up, being and making sure that they go to the good port that you're wishing those credits go for becomes extremely more complex. And many financial institutions do not want to deal with 10,000 people for $1 million. They prefer to give it to one, or divide it perhaps in 10 loans of $100,000, as an example. So popular banking, it's very complex. And I think technology is going to change this. But it has to be technology with financial education. In Mexico today, frequently people say, well, you guys have to go and knock at the door to collect the loans. And it's true, we have to do it, because if we don't do it, they don't pay back the loans. And that makes it more expensive for everybody, because we have to go knock at those doors to get that money back, which at the end of the day, it's not the bank's money. That's something that people tend to forget. 80% of the loans we provide, it's actually the people placing their deposits, their trust with us, that we intermediate to generate those credits. So if something goes wrong, as it happened in the world in 2008, bad bankers had to be bailed out by all the taxpayers. And that's something we have to avoid. Now, let me give you some examples of what I've seen that encourages me to propel forward in financial inclusion from Mexico, but I think that it could happen anywhere in the US or actually anywhere in the world. The first thing is that financial inclusion, it's a motor for development. It's an engine for development. And let me give you the example of Banco Azteca, which I think it was fascinating. I was not there then because it's a very young bank, but I wasn't working at another institution. It opened one day. There was a Wednesday which this bank was not operating, and on a Thursday there were 800 branches that opened. It was able to open 800 branches overnight. What was fascinating is that in many of those communities where we opened branches, there was no previous bank. There had never been a bank in those communities. And over time, the World Bank realized that this was a perfect economic experiment and came in to analyze what had happened before a bank existed in those communities and after the bank came to life. And on a very precise manner, they realized that bank was good for financial development. Actually, it increased the rate of growth of those communities. So for the first time, we had data that was telling us that financial intermediation does propel growth. So we have to work all to make sure that these community banks, these smaller institutions, whatever they are, they do propel growth, because the problem with bigger institutions frequently is that they lack the know-how and the understanding of local banks. When I was at Banorte, we had a small bank in McAllen called the International Bank, right at the border. And this small bank was competing very well with bigger banks. And I was saying, well, how they managed to do it? And one wise person told me, listen, these bigger guys have the know-how, but we have the know-who. And banking, it's combining the know-how with the know-who. And it's absolutely correct. So local, smaller banks should be empowered to provide loans. The problem is that we're dealing today with industries where scale matters, and the bigger your scale, the more competitive you are and the more effective you are. If we are not able to generate local knowledge for local financing, a lot of the financial inclusion issues that we are dealing today will not be solved. Another theme which it's very important to this country, and it's even more important to my own, it's remittances. This year, Mexico is going to receive almost $52 billion of remittances. It's a huge amount of money. Out of a GDP that it's over $1 trillion, that's 5%. And a lot of those remittances do change lives for good. It's a quasi-income that it's there, that gives the opportunity for a lot of people to increase their level of consumption, their level of well-being, and the level of bancarization. But let me just give you another figure that still surprises me. Only 11% of all the people that receive remittances actually bank. Again, we haven't done the job of giving them the elements to understand that there is a safe harbor if you do correctly things with a bank, particularly with savings. And also, an encouraging part in a different manner, the current president of Mexico, Mr. López Obrador, decided to provide social programs. This bank, it's the biggest allocator of those programs. We provide every month around 6 million Mexican people resources, which, as the remittances, make the whole difference for their own well-being. And there, through innovation, through transformation, it's interesting to see that with the digital banking, around 70% of them are starting to bank. So digital transformation does a huge difference for people. And actually, interestingly enough, COVID-19 was a huge accelerator for the digital transformation. In probably 6-7 months, we had to do what we were thinking of doing it in 5-6 years. It's just impressive, the change that we did. But one other aspect where I think it's fundamental, and I see a lot of women, there is still a huge discrimination in banking and in many other respects vis-a-vis women. And doing my homework, not only I saw that 33 million Mexican women do not have access to banking, but the question is why? Why this is happening? And there is a lot of similarities in communities here in the US. Well, the first thing that we don't realize is that many of them are still non-remunerated are working in non-remunerated activities. They stay at home, they take care of the family, they have child care, raising, they get pregnant, and that takes them out of the financial system, and frequently they are not allowed to take a credit, or they're not allowed to do any sort of activity with the banks. Another thing that happens frequently is that they don't have the property ownership. I was appalled to see in Mexico that, for instance, there is central states where people have migrated to this country to look for a better future, the same people that today send the remittances back home. But when the men migrated, they left their families behind frequently, and they kept the title of their properties themselves. So when the wives went to request for a loan or tried to undertake any sort of economic activity, they were not able to do it because they had no guarantee or collateral for those loans, because that property was in the hand of men. It's something that obviously we need to change. Then frequently too, public policy is not oriented towards women, particularly in certain products, in certain themes, where it's done really for men, by men to men. It's absolutely awkward, but it discriminates against people. And one thing that we have understood is that women are better payers. And for that, I remit myself to microcredits. Yes, we guys are bad. Absolutely. In microcredits, when you look at microcredits, which is the first way to generate a credit frequently in very poor communities, 90% of those people allocated those credits are women. And they are great payers, and they're always behind the other women that co-participate with themselves. And sometimes the problem is that some of these selfish institutions that provide microcredits are not thinking of how to graduate them and give them the capacity to move on by themselves. They feel very comfortable with the group lending, they want them there, they make big margins, and they're not really propelling themselves to generate a single credit for each one of them where they can grow and obviously get better conditions as they move forward. In the bank that I work today, we have put a program that it's called in Spanish Somos, which is strictly oriented towards women. We put this probably 1 year ago. And it's very interesting to see how, by providing specific characteristics to those products, you attract a very important number of women. And let me give you some of those characteristics. The first one was to give saving tools. I will call them in Spanish carteras. An envelope for school, an envelope for vacation, an envelope for emergencies, and they start allocating those resources, and they utilize them strictly for those purposes, and sometimes they might switch, but they have an orderly manner, which we men not necessarily do. Then we decided that we could give them assistance, personal assistance through, for instance, checkups, mammograms, mammography, themes that have to deal with women. Well, they're utilizing extensively. We're getting insurance products that they're destined for women. And this is in a country like Mexico. Here in the US might seem like normal. Believe me that it has made a huge difference. And another thing we've been working now in the digital world, and it will surprise you, it doesn't surprise me, but it looks like science fiction, but it's not. We're working with the University of Zurich and the Women World Banking in making sure that the algorithms do not discriminate against women. Frequently, these algorithms are made by men, thought by men, and the way they are made, it's in a way that it discriminates. And you don't realize it. You think that it's perfect, that it does your risk assessment, that it should, but at the end of the day, it's doing something wrong. So I think that more algorithms should be worked for woman by woman, and that will change also financial inclusion. I truly believe in that. Now, it's clear that financial inclusion, and I will finish with this, it's still a huge challenge. Sometimes when I look at my own country, I tend to say we are overdiagnosed. We know where the problems are. we have data on each one of them, but we do not truly deal with them and get rid of them. I think that today, by listening to a lot of you, I start seeing for the first time not only having a clear diagnosis, which is fundamental, but more important, in lieu of working as a silo, each one just doing its own work in its own neighborhood for its own sake. For the first time with this kind of initiatives, I'm seeing a more horizontal work, so bringing people together, trying to understand the issues and dealing with them. I truly wish that with this kind of effort, with these fantastic people, I was telling some of my colleagues at the table that I'm very encouraged to see the level of professionalism, the knowledge, the capacity that you all have, which is truly what is going to change this. So you should be grateful to your parents, to your great-grandparents, because even though they strived and they lived in a very difficult environment, today you can make the difference. Thank you so much.